Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Ukrainian Media Podcast conversation with those who help us make sense of present by understanding the past. I'm Olena Solodovnikova, and today I'm excited to be joined by Aida Cerkez, a writer, manager, and editor with 20 years experience in covering the Balkan region. Aida became chief of the Associated Press Sarajevo bureau in 1994 when the Bosnian capital was under siege. Hello, Aida.
It's been more than 20 years. It's almost 40, but
Oh, so that
I'm a,
is
I'm a dinosaur.
so Aida, a few weeks ago I visited the War Museum in Sarajevo and saw many posters from that time with slogans such as Europe, wake up. However, this did not happen and Europe continued to turn a blind eye to the mass genocide. What did you do wrong? So, as I understand, like Ukrainians, you try to speak the languages art, culture, and humanity. Why did that didn't help stop the war in that time?
First of all, it was the first one after Second World War, so everybody was in shock.
Yeah.
Second, the Bosnian War started a year after the Croatian War and the few days of the Slovenian War. And at the time, the United Nations had put an arms embargo on Yugoslavia. However, the Yugoslav army was by then run by only the Serbs. So, who had all the weapons from the Yugoslav army? Effectively, that meant that under the arms embargo are only those who resist the aggression. Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia. And, the Yugoslav army was also under embargo, but they didn't need anything. They had everything. So it was basically as if as if Ukraine would be attacked by its own army.
Mm-hmm.
And now the rest of the world is putting an arms embargo on Ukraine, so you can't defend yourself against your own army. That's what it's different than in Ukraine. So under those circumstances, all these republics had to form their resistance and their army with no weapons. And nobody until the end of the war ever kind of broke that, gave us weapons. So they thought that by uh, selling weapons to us, that would fuel the war.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That may be, but what the arms embargo did, it fueled the genocide. So one side had a carte blanche to kill everybody whom they want, and face very little resistance. And that's what it meant with "Wake up, Europe! Don't you see what you're doing?" So Bosnians and Croats, to extent as well, blame Europe and the rest of the world for their plight because they have not been given the chance to defend themselves or to buy weapons at the open market, free market, because of the arms embargo.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Okay, now that in Ukraine we have absolutely different situation, we can, Europe supported us with weapon, but sometimes personally I have impression that that is a weapon that don't enough to win the war, to be in some kind of in the middle. Because we need to be the fence between the Europe and between Russia. As now, I talk about today, do Europe even have the power to decide anything outside the Europe borders now? I mean EU borders. Do they have the power at all?
Europe is a complex structure. Everybody has to agree. That rarely works. So all you have to do to block Europe is either to pay or otherwise convince one or two members of the European Union to vote against it.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately how the European Union works. However, that doesn't mean that countries cannot bilaterally help, which I guess they do. Now, Europe is maybe not sending, and the world is not sending enough weapons to win the war. But you have to imagine what it would look like if they would have not sent any weapons, like in Bosnia. And I always think somehow Ukraine is going to make it because we succeeded to survive without any help. Actually, no, no, that's not true because at the end there was a NATO intervention, which I don't think is going to happen in Ukraine, because that would really mean Third World War.
Okay, yes, and just it was my next question that NATO had to end somehow conflict in Yugoslavia with bombardment. Do you see the points today where Ukraine also needs such a tough decision from abroad or not? We don't need it now, this intervention of
What
NATO.
decisions? What decisions?
I mean, is it possible to end the Ukrainian-Russian war now or only with peaceful negotiations agreement in favor of
Yes.
Ukraine? Yeah.
Yes. No, well, in favor of Ukraine, you have to explain to me then what would be in favor of Ukraine. Here is why I'm asking you. I'm sorry, I have a
Okay. It's
sip a
for
little.
me now that the most tough point for us not concede didn't concede our territories, because now we start to talk. Okay, probably Donbas. Is it possible to talk about concede the territories for temporary time and so on? But as for many people in Ukraine, that is impossible. Still impossible for us.
Okay, let me ask you a question. The people who live in Donbas, who do they like? Kiev or Moscow?
Is it a very tricky question because now, through the start of the war to 2014, at least 50% people from Donbas they go abroad, go to Ukraine and for free Ukraine territories, and also some people from Russia came
Okay.
to Donbas. So even if we conducted a referendum here, is it not be like a trustworthy referendum? I think so.
So what you have is the situation has created some kind of a political cleansing. It has, from a population that lived in the Donbas before, that may have been mixed, it has created now a monolith of people who support Moscow. Okay, let's say the war now ends with a peace agreement with which Donbas is Ukraine, with a majority population that doesn't want to be Ukraine. So, and one day you have your parliament, and you will have your Donbas representatives in the parliament. Here's what they're going to do. They're going to block every decision the parliament ever makes to prove that this country doesn't work and needs to be divided. This is what happened in Bosnia. You will have an obstructionist force that will not allow you, say, for example, you want to join the EU or you want to join NATO. How many hands would you have? And, you have a whole region that doesn't want that. It's going to obstruct you in any way it can. So it's a complex issue. You should think about what you really want in your peace negotiations. Losing territory, not good. Getting a territory back with the majority of the population that doesn't want you, not good. Because the Donbas will then always be Moscow's arm in your parliament. That will not let you go forward. So maybe there is a solution to, like we had in the Dayton Peace Agreement, the obligation that everybody has to go home to his pre-war residence. But what that does sometimes is people go home to sell their properties and move away. In which case you again have the same situation when it comes to voting, when it comes to intentions. So you have to be very careful about that, to blindly just insist on keeping the whole territory, you might shoot yourself in the foot with that because it will be an obstructionist force. But then to agree to losing territory, you will again shoot yourself in the other foot.
Yeah.
Because if you give up that part of the territory, that means that rewards aggression, which then can be repeated in 10, 15 years to extend that territory. You never know. But it all comes down to who lives in that territory and who supports what in that territory.
But
And
what do you think about the idea to make a gray zone in that territories, especially in territories which was completely destroyed by Russians? No people here, nobody here, only gray territory between us and Russia.
where would that be?
In some part of Donbas region.
Like a filter zone?
Yeah, filter zone.
So you're gonna kick out the people who live there?
No, now that is absolutely empty territory after the Russian aggression. I mean, we have a lot of towns who were completely destroyed and became empty after that.
And nobody lives there.
Yeah.
So what are you gonna do with these people? So you're not gonna allow these people to return home?
No, now that is the people, they are displacement person, of course, they are most of them on the Ukrainian territory and free Ukraine territory. But yes, just they wanted to back home, but they don't have their homes now, at least.
Yeah, but they would have to have the right to reconstruct their homes.
Yeah.
This is a human rights violation.
Mm-hmm.
If you do not allow somebody to go back to his ruins and build his life again, but maybe that's a better solution than to live there. I don't know. I have no solution for you. You're asking me to solve a problem that, uh, um, much smarter people cannot solve. But what I can tell you is our experience that blindly insisting on keeping a territory on which the population doesn't want you is tricky for the future because they will do everything they can to obstruct your government.
Yes, I absolutely agree. That is very tricky and confusing. You said that you were confused when you know that war in the Balkans had ended. How did you get used to this idea, and how did society get used to this fact?
When you get at some during a war, you live only until tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. That's all you want, to survive the day and maybe survive tomorrow. The word future loses its meaning because your future is only till tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. You do not think like, oh, when the war is over, I will finally end my studies and graduate, or I will get married, and when the war is over, I will open this or that business, because you can't envision that. Your only focus is to survive. Then when it's over, suddenly the word future gets a meaning. Oh, I lost 5 years. How am I going to be able to go back to study after so many dead people? And like, uh, for example, you had people who started to study on the faculty, and then the war broke out, and they were drafted, and they're soldiers now, and you want to get them back into the classroom where a professor will tell them what kind of homework they should do and then punish them for not doing a homework to a person who killed 50 people and he's 22. It's difficult. So to cope with that, with the end of the war, is I did not know it's going to be that difficult. For example, my editor, when he told me one night, there was no electricity and I had to turn on the generator and the satellite phone to call my office, and he told me, like, sit down, and I said, I'm sitting. Um, the war is over. And I was I felt nothing. Eh, like no joy, no shock, no, just nothing. And after a minute, I think I said, Mark, how did it end? Who won? and and he said, you have a country. And then he made a pause and said, what are you going to do with it? And this question, what are you going to do with it, is haunting me for 30 years, because to build up a society after such a conflict sometimes is as hard as fighting a war, with a traumatized population, with all the refugees, with the conflict between the refugees who will return to Ukraine and the people who stayed there, because they will treat those who will come back as traitors, oh, where were you when it was difficult? They will suffer because they didn't really have a good time as refugees either. Um, all these conflicts within the society, to build up a school system to deal with the losses, to deal with the lack of jobs, a lack of infrastructure, um, with the traumatized population, after, like, 20 years after the war here, I interviewed some psychologists and psychiatrists, and they said, according to the World Health Organization, 70% of Sarajevans have PTSD.
Oh.
70. And I came out of this interview and thought, my God, like 70% of us are nuts, like, I feel sorry for the 30%, that are not crazy. How do they cope with all of us? You live in a crazy house and you're normal. That must be worse than being crazy. So, all these conflicts, the foreign policy, who's going to run what, corruption, lack of a real health system that you have to build up from scratch. Okay, Bosnia was more devastated than Ukraine because of the situation I described before. So we really had to rebuild all this from scratch. Like, uh, you suddenly, like, think, oh, if somebody breaks into my apartment and I call the police, really, first of all, the phone will work, and then a police will actually come. That's new. Thankfully, somehow during the siege, the solidarity between people was such, and there was nothing to steal. What are you going to steal from someone? Break into somebody's apartment. What are you going to steal? A television in a city that hasn't seen electricity for 4 years? What? There's nothing to steal. So there was not that much crime, really. You
So
know, you
really,
can't.
you don't have electricity for 4 years? Really? Oh gosh. So we on the start of this process. Oh gosh.
It would come for 2 days and then it would be knocked out again. And, every time the United Nations would patch it up together, it would work for a couple of hours and you would lose it. I, I remember one of my colleagues, same with water, you know, no water. And then the UN patches it up together again, as soon as they leave, the Serbs shoot at it again. We just had a half an hour of water. And and I remember one of my colleagues went out on the street to interview people like how do they feel when the electricity or water is back on? And I think the most memorable one guy like how do I feel when what? Like when electricity or water comes on? And he thinks about, you mean simultaneously? That has never
Miracle, miracle.
that has never happened. And so, yeah, to rebuild that infrastructure was really took decades. And it's still, we're still building a society that is trying to at least get back where we were before the war. It's
Mhm.
it's going to be a very long battle.
And I wondering how did the Balkans cope with the return of the refugees from the abroad after the war, and how many people came back and why? Because you know that in Ukraine now, according to the rough estimates, there are currently up to 7 million Ukrainians living abroad. What should we do to bring them back home?
7 million, and how many Ukrainians? What's the percentage?
Uh, that's the very difficult question, but we think like 35 million, like that at all. We hope
No.
it.
How much, how many, what's the population of Ukraine
The
before the
population, we don't have concrete estimates because we don't have these processes with them, and also how to estimate Crimea and Donbas, and also,
war?
but at least I think 35 million people we have at all in Ukraine. So 7 million, it's very big percentage.
Okay. In Bosnia, we had 3.5 million people before the war and 1 million refugees. That's almost one third of the population. That it's that's much more.
Yeah.
Some of them will come back, some of them won't ever. There's this generation that's lost, you know. Those who will come back, they will face, and mostly due to the fact that countries that have accepted them as refugees will send them back because the war is over. And they will struggle. There will be a probably just like here a reconstruction project that everybody will pay for, Europe, America, and I don't know. In this global setup, I don't know. To get them back home. But our experience is that it is wiser to invest in jobs, in economy, and get people to be able to work somewhere, and then they will build their home rather than rebuild their homes and they sit in those and have no jobs and they leave again. You know, that don't make that mistake that we have made. Like we thought rebuilding the house and the school and the hospital will be enough. No, if you don't have a job, you leave. So that'll be a major challenge. But how do you revive the economy again? That's going to take a lot of money and a lot of effort, but eventually you will have to do it. These are your people. It's going to be tough, but these are your people. You have to deal with it.
Yes, and also, if it's possible to ask you this question, because many families in Ukraine, after some part of families go abroad, they split off, and you have a difficult relationship with your mother and siblings, I think so, because they came to Germany during the war, and you stayed home in siege. What the nature of this conflict, and how did you manage to normalize the relationship later on?
Oh my God, my mother left Sarajevo with my 2.5-year-old son and went to Germany to her sister, who lived there forever. Um, and every time I would talk to her, she would complain how hard it was to be a refugee and how terrible, and I'm being shot at. So I had no understanding for her loss of identity, loss of sense of home, just to be there as a guest for years. And I would constantly ask her, "Oh, really? Are they shelling Frankfurt really bad today?" Like, don't complain to me, in what kind of mess I am. Until one day she told me just to shut up. And she said, I left to save your child, but I left my child in hell. I was
Oh,
quiet from then on, really, like that was really to, I'm a mother now, and she went to save my child, and she left her own child in this. So I never said it again. But when they came back, my mother did not feel welcome. She was terrified by the destruction. She just could not see how this can be even be put together again. And for her, coming from a organized society from Germany, coming back to Sarajevo, devastated Sarajevo, was a step back. For me, I was in Sarajevo that was being shelled at, and the absence of shooting was a step forward. To me, Sarajevo was beautiful. Although there was not one stone standing on it, it was great, because it was better than I was used to during the war. For her, it was terrible because she remembered it the way it was before the destruction. So this collided, and then my son already had to go to school with children who were heavily traumatized, and did not really behave in a normal way. They were screaming, they were crying, they were yelling. It felt like they had no manners, you know, and he could not cope with them. He felt very off. So that took years to adjust, really years. But eventually it melts down again. But you will see after the war, when you have a party at your house, uh, it doesn't matter whether they're families or not. At some point, those who were in Ukraine during the war will end up in one room, and those who were refugees will end up in another room because
Mm,
they have their own stories, and they don't understand each other. And
yeah,
I watched that, like somehow naturally after an hour, they divide, you know.
yeah.
Eventually, after years, they will come back together, but it will be an effort.
Yes, probably. This is a lot that Germany used to Balkan schemes. They had already developed to accept Ukrainian refugees in 2022. However,